Hello, everybody. Nice to be here with all of you. A new world is emerging. The world inherited from World War II, based on multilateralism, rule of law and dominated by the US and US dollar, is being challenged or even disappearing. We have four main dynamics ongoing: geopolitics, climate, technology, and demography. On geopolitics, as Jan Bremer puts it in the last State of the World talk, USA chose to walk away from the international system that the USA built and led for 3/4 of a century. Next to that, China is clearly the main challenger and becoming the new superpower at the world and regional level. And Asia constitutes clearly the third bloc, source of 60% of the world growth and 60% of the population. Technology and AI is another game changer. It disrupts productivity and labor markets, business models also. Climate change creates also new challenges, especially in this region, given the nature of its energy mix, mainly relying on carbon energy, and also given the very high exposure of the region to extreme events. And finally, demography. Most developed Asian economies have very low fertility rates, including Singapore, with growing consequences on workforce, social safety nets, and perhaps fiscal situation, whereas Asian countries still benefit from a dynamic and young population. With this panel, and thanks for joining, we will explore those dynamics and try to identify where we are heading to for the next decade and which opportunities and risks are emerging. Thanks to our panelists. Dan Wang, you are China Director of the Eurasia Group. Sedomir Nestorovic, excuse me from my pronunciation. You are professor at ESSEC Business School here in Singapore and co-director of the Institute of Geopolitics and Business. And Taimur Baig, Managing Director and Chief Economist of DBS Bank. So on these four topics, I will start with geopolitics. And Dan, if US is to withdraw of its historical role as the world leader, how do you see the balance of power in Asia between the US, China, and the rest of Asia?
Well, thank you for this great question. Because on my way here, I was thinking about whether I should be more optimistic or pessimistic about the direction going on in Asia. There is very little signs are actually showing that situations are improving, because the China-U.S. competition is basically intensifying in the past few years, and this year we're probably at the peak China-U.S. relations right now, given that two leaders have met and probably Trump will visit China again next year. But leading up to every major diplomatic event in 2026, we will see a lot of mini crises. And that will be in a similar fashion as this year, when China escalated its rare earth export control and probably magnified in other aspects as well. And I visit China about once a month. And in my last visit to Beijing, I met all kinds of regulators and top officials from the Treasury, central banks, SAFE, you name it, NDRC. And everyone was expressing a kind of confidence in China's assertiveness in using export control. So the leaders didn't know how effective this tool can be. And they're even discussing about extending some of the export control to other areas that China also has dominance in supply chain. And that includes semiconductors in lower version, say below 28 nanometers, 40 nanometers that's using auto industry, or 70 nanometers using weaponry. So overall, I don't think that China-U.S. competition will stop anytime soon, and the long-term decoupling is actually still there. But one aspect we should keep in mind is also that no one can de-risk from its powerful neighbor. And that means ASEAN, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, their economy and investment still highly dependent on China. Despite all those pressures from the US, the regional integration in Asia could only deepen over time.
Thank you. And same question for Sedomir. Is the China-U.S. confrontation to last for a long period, as Dan said?
Thank you very much for the question. Of course, it will last for quite a long time. So from the perspective of Europe, we may have other problems, such as Ukraine or Israel and Gaza. So we may believe that Asia is far away, but in fact, it is not, because whatever happens between the United States and China will affect us. So would it be positively or negatively? And in that case, we have to prepare for that, especially because both countries, it was the US first, but China also, try to use extraterritoriality in order to put pressure on other countries by saying you cannot use this, you cannot use that, etc. So it is quite a threat for other countries, because if we cannot use, let's say, technology, or if we cannot use the devices, if we cannot use the raw materials which are coming from both countries, this will affect everyone. So this is why this competition between the US and China is a fundamental one. I remember it was during the COVID, the senior minister, Li Xianlong, in an interview for Foreign Affairs, he has stated that it is the fundamental issue of our time. He didn't mention the COVID, but he mentioned the US-China competition. So it means that for him, but also for Singapore and for all other countries, it is going to stay. However, US and China are not the only countries in the world. ASEAN is more than practically 700 million people. Europe, where is Europe in all that? So in that case, I think there will be some room in order to maneuver for this. I will stop there.
Taimur, your view on that?
You know, we are getting used to stress tests since the pandemic. So look at 2025. 6 months ago, when I was sitting with my forecasting model, I was looking at a world where trade would come to a significant amount of stoppage. We will have breakdowns in supply chain, cost of doing business would soar, and investment sentiment would collapse. I was wrong on every single count. 2025 is turning out to be a great year for the world economy. It is barely slowing from 2024, which was itself a pretty good year. And global supply chains, yes, there is recalibration going on. Yes, we're worried about the temperamental nature of US policymaking, but the fact of the matter is we can deal with it. We are sitting in a region which is going through a golden age of investment. Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, all on course to set an all-time record in FDI in 2025, on top of an all-time record in 2024. So yes, China-U.S. friction, massively problematic, keeps us up at night, but we, I think, are turning out to be way more resilient than we had feared earlier. When I look at the 2026 outlook, my fear is more issues related to U.S. financial markets and the issue related to Russia and Ukraine and peace and prosperity, but on the supply chain, on overall ability of businesses to make money and consumer sentiment to consume, I'm not that worried.
Good. Back to ASEAN, Sedomir, that you mentioned, we often hear in Singapore and all over ASEAN countries, don't ask us to choose between China and the US. Do you consider that ASEAN region can become a new area of connectivity and perhaps new relations with Europe?
You're absolutely right, because I just came from Indonesia, I was there last week, and in spite of all the problems, and there are many problems in ASEAN, if I'm going back to the opportunities that Taimur has indicated, the opportunities are definitely here because of the young population that we have there and some kind of optimism that maybe we cannot find in some other places in the world. So I truly believe that ASEAN is a beacon here, shining in the region, and that it will continue to do so because it is also starting from a very low position. So it can only go higher, and hopefully it will go higher. This is where Concerning the US and China position, obviously China is the biggest trading partner, but the US is the biggest security partner. So this is why they don't want to choose, because either you're choosing between economy and security. They want both of them to have there. And this is where I insist again on Europe, that Europe can have a role to play, because Europe can be an opportunity also for the ASEAN countries also to foster this non-choice, to say we don't want to choose between them, we want to continue to be good with them, but we also have Europe that we can cooperate with, and the FTAs that are rolling on between Europe and ASEAN countries will confirm that.
Dan, any view on that? This neutrality position, is it sustainable on the long term?
Well, I certainly believe ASEAN cannot stay neutral. So these two sides, one has to pick one. And when it comes to the trade relation and investment relation, clearly it looks more important to strengthen that with China. I'm not saying that just because I know more about China policies. Just by the cash flow in the past 5 years in ASEAN, you can almost see this emerging trend that the US is retreating from this area. The US direct investment in almost every ASEAN country is declining, with the exception of Malaysia and Singapore. And then when it comes to China, its investment trade is improving with every single country. And I can see that there are a lot of actions going on in the past 5 years in the Greater Asia area, and much of the capital, the cross-border capital flow and cross-border people movement wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the geopolitical tensions between China and the US. And this trend will intensify in the next couple of years. It won't weaken.
Thank you. Yes, please, Taimo.
I'm going to add to Dan's point on the issue of technology. Yes, of course, the geopolitical forces were a major driver of the recalibration of investment flows in the region. But the other major force, which would have taken place independent of the geopolitical situation, is China's tech ascendancy. The reason today we have a lot of willing partners wanting to deal with the Chinese is not because of China's coercive diplomacy or China's large market share. It's because the new wave of tech developments are increasingly coming from Chinese labs and people who are commercializing patents coming out of China. I have met with drug manufacturers in Europe who have increasing amount of collaboration with Chinese labs because, as they say, the key breakthroughs in life sciences are coming from Chinese labs. So not because of geopolitics, not because of coercion, those are important factors nonetheless, but the increasing story is that there are consequential technologies coming out of China that we want to consume. And this is going to fundamentally transform the dialogue between West and China. The dialogue in the last 20, 30 years has been the obvious one. China steals IP, China copies Western design, they deploy big scale, they drive down the cost, and that really hurts jobs and prosperity elsewhere in the world. To me, that's yesterday's story. Tomorrow's story is, if consequential technologies are coming from China that I want to consume, how much do I want to pay for licensing that? Or do I want to ignore that and try to make my own tech, or do I just go down that path where I have to become partners with the best-in-class technology across a wide range of areas?
Thank you. Talking about technology, that will be our second topic. So China is clearly the global manufacturing power and appears to be in a growing leading position in innovation. I'm sure you're aware of this analysis from the ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The numbers are very important. Under the 64 technologies under review, China was in a leading position in 3 of these technologies in 2003, 2007, and now is in a leading position in 57 out of the 64, from 3 to 67, so to 57, sorry, in 2019, 2023. So 2 questions on the leading position of China and the impact of AI on the manufacturing sector. Do you consider that this leading position of China is to go growing in the future? Dan?
That's designed. It's designed in the 15th five-year plan. The final plan hasn't come out. It will come out next March. But based on the document we have now, you can see the ambition for the next 5 years is very different. So I've been following China's economy for the past 15 years, and this is actually the first time that China is saying that it wants to lead in more fields. Previously, the narrative was always about catching up, the application. But now China is all about original innovation, especially in some of the transformative technology in the future. And that include bioengineering, biomanufacturing. This is in direct competition with India, and China has this implicit goal of taking more market share from India in the next 5 years. And then there's the sixth generation of telecommunication, there's the quantum computing. So China's commitment to high tech is very real. It's at a very high cost in the short term, because this is very similar to what's going on in China in the 1950s, when it was trying to establish this heavy industry foundation. So it was basically at the cost of 2 generations of Chinese welfare. But the government was committed in developing modern industry back then. And now it is trying to improve this modern industrial base to a next level. And in this process, the spillover effect to whole Asia and the rest of the world will be huge. Because by investing this much in high tech, and it can only make Chinese companies to become more competitive and take even higher share in the global market.
Any comments, Taimur, on this growing leading position of China in
right. So
technologies?
The big question is there going to be a new kind of a China shock, which is, unlike the previous China shock where China sort of displaced blue-collar workers out of the West and took up those jobs, would it now command the entire spectrum of the supply chain, low-end and top-end, and it'll enjoy absolute advantage in everything, which I think defies the laws of economic gravity, and I really think that'll play out. I cannot imagine the low end of the value spectrum being captive in China. I think I hear a lot from people that China is embracing robotics and automation in such a way that even garments would continue to be made in China even while they make very high-end stuff. I think that is wrong. I think once your per capita income is $10,000, $15,000 and beyond, nobody wants to work in a garments factory. And even the return on capital from garments is very unattractive compared to other areas. Already in the last 10 years, China's global market share in ready-made apparel has gone from 54% to 40%. We could argue it's too high, that given China's income level, it should be 20 or 10 or even falling. But the fact of the matter is it is falling. And while we talk a lot about trade and tariff vis-a-vis the US, let's not forget that for most developing countries in the world, exporting into China is zero tariff. For most ASEAN countries in the world, exporting into China, there are non-tariff barriers, but by and large, tariff is zero. If you look at this year's export performance, Singapore to Taiwan to India, exports are up 15, 20, 25% on a year-on-year basis. So to me, that's the key issue. We, I think, by and large, have woken up to the reality of China's tech ascendancy. But we seem to be so impressed with China, we think that, oh my God, they will just rule the world and they took over every single supply chain. That's just not the way economics works. As they become richer, they will cede space for low-income economies. I'm sure about that, and this is where I disagree with many of my peers in the industry who believe that China's issue is to dominate the entire wage spectrum. And I also think that as China loses access to the US, it will become a gentler, kinder counterpart to the rest of the world. I'm beginning to see this in particular in its trade relationship with India. The two countries have lots of problems on the border, but in terms of investment, tech transfer, it's becoming much more amenable than before. You go to the streets of Bombay and Delhi today, you will see MG cars everywhere. MG is made in China, Shanghai Auto. How are they operating out of India? Because it's a 50-50 joint venture with full tech transfer with JSW in India. I think that's the blueprint for the rest of the world. We can now sort of push the Chinese into becoming a fairer, more amenable trading partner because they have a problem with the US access.
Thank you. Sedomi, a question about AI. The region is characterized all over the region by the importance of the manufacturing sector, whatever it's in developed economy or emerging economies. What could be the impact on AI on those manufacturing sectors? Because we all know that there could be some kind of substitution and huge gains of productivity.
So concerning AI, there is also the geopolitics of AI. In order to see which countries are leading the AI revolution, which countries are lagging behind. So obviously, the question of China is a central one concerning AI because they have advanced in many things. But they have advanced in things that maybe in the other countries we don't want to do, such as face recognition, such as privacy for data, and so on. So this is where we can have disagreements with China concerning the policy that they have, concerning the use of AI that we, maybe in Europe or in the United States, we don't want. So this is why they may have some lead in this domain, but because of the political situation, maybe we cannot catch up with China so soon concerning this. So that's the geopolitics of AI that we have, but it is adapted that China is leading here. But China is not living in splendid isolation. We have other countries. We have Japan on the other side. We have Korea, South Korea. Taiwan is also present there concerning the semiconductors. So I won't see that China is completely alone in the question of AI, even if they have a leading position for today. So we have to see how the others will respond, especially when it comes to quantum, in order to see if, for instance, Japan and South Korea can be in advance, even in front of China or not. But the principal thing that I see is that AI is developing very much in China because we don't want to do the same thing from the political point of view.
Thank you. Next topic is the rethinking.
Stefan, can I just add
one
point?
please, please, Taimo.
One of the three people who won the Nobel Prize was a Frenchman, Philippe Aghion, and Philippe does a lot of work on this issue.
Yes.
The impact of AI on jobs and so on. His new paper that came out in July looks at French industry data of the last decade. And by the way, let's be clear, we're talking about AI, not just Gen AI. We're not just talking about large language models, okay? There's a lot of skepticism, including by some French scientists who work for Meta, for example. I'm talking about AI, and the question that Philippe Aghion asked was that, would it lead to a huge displacement of jobs in the companies in France which embrace AI more than others? And the answer is a comforting one. Most companies which are very successful in embracing AI actually see augmentation of capabilities, not displacement of labor. I just wanted to, given that we always talk about the scary stuff of AI, I just want to share that one with everybody.
Thank you, Taimo. So next topic about the global value chain and the rethinking of those global value chain. As we all know, since Trump won, if I may call it so, Asia, and more specifically ASEAN countries, have been dramatically benefiting from this so-called China+1 policy. And I'm thinking especially of Vietnam, of course, but also Malaysia and certainly Taiwan and Singapore. Do you consider that this China+1 policy in this context of new tariffs, of confrontation, is to last in the future? And a second question attached, we do see some growing regional integration of the economies. Does this second trend is to last in the future?
The China+1 now has become China+N. So it is China as a base, but the risk is so high. And different countries are using different ways to push back the influence from China, either exports or investment. So I can see that Chinese companies or foreign companies that have operations in China are speeding up their industrial relocation to other regions. So if it's an American manufacturer, a typical second place or third place will in the Central America or Latin America or Middle East. And for Chinese companies, the second or third or fourth place would be all over the place. It is really this new model that we haven't seen before. Because when we talk about industrial relocation before, it was driven by cost. Now, clearly, it's not driven by cost. It's driven by some sort of risk assessment. So China will not be the one that's still at the center of the world manufacturing eventually. So it has to be way more dispersed. But one caveat in that is when we think about China's manufacturing value added right now to the world, it's about 1/3. But if we think about the operations owned by Chinese globally, it is more than half. And even if you're not using things produced within the boundary of China, you're using things produced outside of China, owned by Chinese, or supported by Chinese capital. So it's a whole different story now. And I think this world still consistently underestimates the strength of China's supply chain. It's simply too strong. Unless the demand from the West and emerging market can actually go down, or they can find alternative supply chain that can produce things at the same cost efficiency. Otherwise, the share of Chinese manufacturing in the world will continue to grow.
Any comments, Taimur?
I think we need to re-stress the point Dan made, because that is absolutely critical. We can have all sorts of ways of trying to pin the Chinese down, export controls or this transshipment related tariffs. It is futile. There are Singaporean citizens who were born in China, educated in China, made their millions or billions in China, but they now are Singaporean citizens and they have companies and deposits and know-how in Singapore. Is that a Chinese business or a Singaporean business? If a Chinese person has become a citizen of the United States or is a green card holder in the U.S., does that person become American or the Chinese? It's 1.4 billion people, and even if you take the tail, they're important, consequential, they're part of the global fabric. So this idea of decoupling or put the Chinese in a corner, I think sort of futile. But if I might just not talk about China for a second, because I think this is not supposed to be just about China. In the region, I said earlier that point that there is a golden age of investment going on in Southeast Asia. I was recently in Brunei. There's a lot of capital in Brunei. We're sitting in Singapore. There's a lot of capital in Singapore. This region can fund its green transition, its adoption of AI, embrace the new future of energy with its own capital. It's great that the rest of the world is interested in Southeast Asia's supply chain and they want to come and do business. But the region is not beholden to the rest of the world. I think that's a critical issue because when you're beholden, you tend to suffer from geopolitical as well as macroeconomic volatility. Flows follow geopolitical cycles, flows follow economic cycles. Because the region is capital rich, it is more insulated than it was, say, in the 1990s when it had a financial crisis because it used to run persistent current account deficit. So to me, those who want to do business with this region should recognize that point. Point number one is Dan's point. You cannot think of Southeast Asia in any stretch of imagination as detached from China, but at the same time, you don't have to worry about Southeast Asia as being beholden to massive cycles in geopolitics and global macroeconomics.
Thank you. Sidomir?
Yes, you don't have too much time. I'm looking at the time here. So for the two questions that you have mentioned, China plus one, of course, China is a big market, but again, China is not alone in the world. The world is big, and we can be also present somewhere else. So China plus one is not only ASEAN. China plus one can be Mexico. China plus one can be Senegal, as it has been indicated before. At ESSEC, we have two campuses. We have a ASEAN campus here in Singapore, but we have a campus also in Rabat, in Morocco. So the world is vast. There are opportunities everywhere. However, we have to recognize that China is a big player. It is not the only player that we have. And the second question is about the ASEAN. The cooperation within ASEAN has been a long debated thing. And when I see the people in Malaysia or in Indonesia, they are all jealous because of the European Union, but they will never become the European Union or the integration that we have in the European Union. And one reason for that is the lack of infrastructures that we have here. The possibility of physical infrastructures between the different countries in ASEAN is really a very big obstacle to the integration. In Europe, we have one land, but here it is archipelagos everywhere. So it is very difficult to have this kind of physical integration between them. unless we have digital integration, which is replacing the physical one, it will be very difficult for them to cooperate and to represent one unified market as we have in the European Union.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are running out of time. I would have many more questions to ask, but I have to say a big thank you to all of you for answering those questions, and thank you very much.